Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 92, Why Lead Buyers Need to Think More Professionally. And today we're joined by Vince Venditti, CMO of American Residential Services, who's going to help us explore this idea. Vince, how are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. And where are you joining us from? I know we talked about this before for the people listening.
I am in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, and it's beautiful, cold morning.
Sounds a lot cooler than Sheffield, doesn't it? Maybe we're just biased. Yes, if people listening, if you listen to this podcast before, we tend to have this overarching idea, but it's pretty free flowing. So we decide to take it somewhere else. By all means, feel free to take it wherever you like. But to get us started, could you just intro yourself and what it is you do, and specifically a bit about your history in lead buying?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in the home improvement industry for the better part of a decade. I joined a small gutter guard company back in 2014 that did around $35 million in sales. And fast forward to 2022, that same company did about $1.7 billion in sales. Lead aggregators, I mean, they were a part of it like any business is. And it was obviously, very great place, great time for me personally. I met my wife there. So that was a great part for me personally. And it brought me to my current chapter of CMO at American Residential Services, which is one of the nation's largest HVAC and plumbing companies in the US.
Does your wife ever say to you, give me that gutter talk?
No, she doesn't. You'd be surprised. I think it's funny. This is the first time in our relationship that we aren't working together, and it's different because I think there's this idea that you shouldn't work with your spouse. Well, the truth is that we don't know it any different. So, that's how we met. So to us, it's totally normal. But you would be surprised at how often we talk about not so much gutters, but marketing for sure.
Do you mind me asking a quick question, so that we can establish what we're all talking about? When you talk about aggregated leads and then different type of leads, exactly what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I use them interchangeably, and sometimes I don't know that I have the right definition. I think I'd better sum it up as partners. When you think of partner leads, it can be an aggregator lead, which could be something like Home Advisor or Modernize, or a number of different aggregator leads that are specific to a specific industry. You can think about it as affiliate marketing, where it could be through a platform or partnerships that you work on one-on-one. But really, I think what it comes down to is either first or third party brand representation by not the brand directly itself.
Yeah, so what you're relying on is like the vertical intent of the user, and then they've come in via another brand and you're picking up. It's a bit like the way a lot of estate agency stuff works, where it's, collects under a portal and then driven to the end destination.
Yeah. I think it could be a number of things. I mean, my introduction to it, I didn't know it at the time. You think back to when we used to have to call to update your cable bill or your phone bill. And at the end, they would always say, hey, do you want to hear a few special partners offers from our partners? And typically you say no, or, whatever you say. But that, when I look back on it, that was my first real experience as a consumer to a partnership marketing, if you may call it, right? So that was, I think that's one version of many different versions of affiliate or partner or aggregator type marketing.
Yeah.
So Vince, very quickly there, definitely establish your credentials to answer this next question. But what do you think separates the good lead buyers from maybe the not so good ones?
I think it's bias. I think if you were to sum it up in one word, it has to be biased to some extent. I think the way marketing's headed is you have to be very data driven. And I pride myself on being a marketer that doesn't, just use one buzzword after another. So I'm going to try to keep this real, right? Instead of just floating buzzwords out there. But I think what it comes down to is, look, personally, I've experienced purchasing upwards of 1 million leads a year in my my professional history. And the truth is that not all aggregator, affiliate, partner leads are created equal. That's very true to say. But I think that's true to say amongst all leads in general, right? So I think what it comes down to is understanding the unique funnel for each one of those different partners or different sources, and making sure that you're optimizing the full funnel and not necessarily looking at it at one point within that funnel and then saying, these leads don't work, let's turn them off. It's really an exciting opportunity to be able to take multiple partners and almost create a bit of a marketplace for your company and have them to some extent compete against each other, which is very common and very, it's very much commonplace in on the buyer side. But yeah, I think it's biased, to answer your question.
I think one of the things that a lot of people that buy leads that separate good and bad is what you just sort of alluded to, which is this feedback loop. So there's sort of two types of feedback loops. There's an internal one where you're running reports and stuff and you're looking at, green or red and like, where should we place more money? But then the feedback to the lead aggregators or the partners, so that they know where to start putting more money, so that they're going to buy leads either at a higher price or better quality, or from one place or the other. And what you often find is, like, at best, people might segregate lead sources by either like the overarching channel, so it'll be like Facebook or PPC or
Sure.
native or something. And then what they might also do is then do it at their most granular. You'll see people do it by the individual source, but then there's another step beyond that, which is like either the subsource or the individual like granular ads that are running, that leads are coming from, or the individual keywords and stuff like that. And very few people go that deep, and the devil's really in the detail, which is why, like I said, it's not all leads are created equal and not all partners are bad. But at the same time, if you dig deep enough, you start to see trends and things like that, you turn individual components off, not like end partnerships over it.
Yeah, there's this gigantic dimensionalized way of looking at it, right? It's tough to generalize anything too much when looking at these lead sources. There may be one lead source that is your number one lead source overall, but there are still bad dimensions within that lead source. So I think it does come down to, I always use this word operational excellence. I think when people look at marketing, they look at it in two areas. They see marketing at the top, they see branding as one branch and advertising as the other. But there's this neglected third branch called marketing operations that is so vital and important. And it really is what I think you said it perfect with that feedback loop, right? And operational excellence is how you make these leads thrive, right? And with that comes, I've always noticed this hesitation to share data with partners because, even if an NDA is locked tight, it's still, there's always a hesitancy internally to share too much data. But I've noticed it on the partner side as well, where they don't want to give too much of their secret sauce or what would stop the brand from just doing that themselves, right? So there's this element of trust and this element of partnership. Literally, we call them partners, but so often it's this just transactional, hey, you send us a lead, we'll send you a few dollars and a few $100 and we're done. We wipe our hands of it. But without that level of trust, which is obviously built and earned over time with some of your bigger partners, you eventually hit a wall to where you can't get much better, right? Because you're not sharing that detailed level of granular data that you just mentioned that ultimately is going to unlock that next layer of success. So, you had asked for one word earlier. I mean, it's bias, but I also think trust when it comes to the execution of it is difficult. It's hard to find, and it's a feeling, right? We get so caught up in data, but trust is sometimes difficult to measure, and it could either be the key to making you grow or the key to making you not, right? So I think that's another angle there.
Yeah, it's funny that it works both ways as well. So I've seen it where a brand buying leads or a lead buyer would be like, yeah, I'm not going to give sales back to them so that they can put the CPL up because they'll know how well they're doing is one. The other is I don't want them to know either if someone's a current customer or becomes a customer, because I think they're going to sell that data at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But now I've seen it the other way around, where a lead generator or a lead aggregator is running a specific ad. They've given it to the client, and then they've said that the client has told another lead aggregator to run an ad that looks like this. So when someone said that to me, I was like, I think your problem is that you don't have a brand. Because
Mm.
if you're relying on a single ad to produce results, that ad's going to fade over time and whatever else. You're relying on sort of CRO tactics, which are needed. But if that's all you've got, like, why not work on adding more value to people so that they sort of come to you and you're not just relying on like copy or, someone
Yeah.
pointing at a CTA button or whatever, I don't know what the ad was. So yeah, you see it work both ways with this element of trust. It's not just the buyers, the sellers, exactly like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
don't want to give this information. But sometimes you'll find it's because they're doing something wrong as well. Like there'll be some advertising that potentially, they shouldn't be running, stuff like that.
And that's something that I think we could get into here is I had wrote an article a few months back that goes into really how do you control your brand when you're dealing with so many different lead sources, right? Because oftentimes brand marketers are so, and they should be, they're so focused on the look and feel and the experience of the ad that may cost the results, right? And performance marketers, your lead partners, are so much on the other end of the spectrum where they'll completely sacrifice the brand to make a quick dollar. And there's this middle, and it's the middle of this Venn diagram that is paper thin that you have to kind of constantly balance as a leader within marketing to say, that is officially too far, right? We need to follow our brand guidelines. I understand that it may give us a 10% lift in click-through rate, but that's going to last a short period of time until we need to undo this mess. And brand takes so long to build and just a very, very short amount of time to lose, right? So I think that's an interesting thing you bring up in terms of the brand standards that these lead aggregators need to follow, and then how hard policing that is at times, depending on how many partners you work with.
How did you used to police it then?
Sometimes you can't, to be honest. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's, as much as, data and technology is great, you think that you're just going to get a screen pop that says like, hey, this aggregator violated this rule. Well, that's never the case, right? Like that would be ideal. But the truth is that a lot of times you're catching it after the fact. But again, it goes back to this word trust, and it's this word relationship that you build with these partners over time. And they understand that they're not just representing themselves, but they're quite literally representing your brand if you're allowing them to use that first party brand. So I think that, that ultimately helps make the decision in terms of, do you allow this partner to represent your brand on a first party basis, or do you, do they run a third party brand that then redirects the leads over to you, right? The partners that follow the standards and are great partners and build trust over time, I think you slowly migrate them onto that first party brand because they're likely going to receive improved click-through rates and conversion rates. And it's just going to be a smoother transaction or a process throughout the transaction for the consumer, because you're not passing that, clunky one brand A to brand B and then having to explain, exactly how that works to the consumer. It's seamless. So it's not sacrificing short-term for long-term success.
So I think the reason why a lot of lead generators want it and do it is because if you're at the coalface buying PPC or Facebook leads or whatever, or affiliate even, which is less important because you're generally paying out on a CPL, but if you don't buy it, they want someone else to buy it. So
That's true. Yeah, that's a great
like
point.
One to many. So they generate their gutter lead under, Mike's guttering or whatever their brand is, and then you go, it's already a customer, or some of the things can't sell to that region. They just go, okay, this now goes to this guttering company, and so it's I think that's the problem when we used to come up with this thing of like, if you're paying on either a CPC or some other metric where there's a lot of risk involved, you don't get like a choice in what happens. Obviously, within guidelines and things, if you are doing it under the brand or any legal things, it has to be within those guidelines. If you're paying on a CPL, then you get to choose. Sorry, it was the other way around. If you're paying on a CPL, you don't get to choose sort of what happens. So we might have to do it under a different brand. If you're paying on if you're picking the costs up under cost per click or whatever, however the media is being bought, then you can sort of tell us what to do, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about the different ways of the structuring the contracts, right? Whether it's a cost per lead or cost per click or cost whatever it may be, conversion at the top of the funnel all the way down to revenue share. And it's interesting because depending on the partner, some partners actually do prefer to be at the bottom. They want to see it all the way through. And obviously that's because that means that they receive the data and they can understand what goes along with it. But I think another, and I'm interested in your take on this, something that's sometimes complicated for the marketing team is that the marketing team obviously only controls that sale up to a certain point, or that lead up to a certain point in the funnel. So even if that partner does see an opportunity to say, hey, like if you could close these at 60% instead of 58, we'd be able to lower your comm from this to this. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if we could lower it even further, you could probably lower, but like, we understand that there's limitations to that and how far and how, how improved and how optimized that can be. And then we're bringing more people into the, more cooks into the kitchen, as some may say. So I'm curious kind of as your, in terms of your perspective, where the right line is, whether that's cost per lead, cost per qualified lead, cost per appointment, cost per, what have you found to be the secret sauce there?
So I think it's a blend is what the answer is. I don't think it's not there isn't a predefined thing. I think, so I used to do a lot of lead buying, like a tremendous amount from aggregators and stuff like that as well. And we used to do the same then. We'd create blends. We'd create our own brand or do it for the client under their brand, create our own brand, and then buy from lots of aggregators who would either drive traffic to our brand or the client's brand and then create all their own brands. And what we used to do is, track at a really granular level. We'd have access to all the sales information. We'd get like disposition reports and things. And so what we used to do is just go into like boxes of what we thought the conversion rates would be. So, it'd be like high conversion rates, which might be, 20% plus conversion rates, and then middle tier, low tier. And what the sales teams were really looking for, as you'll know, is just a flat line. They didn't want wild leaps up and wild leaps down and whatever. They just wanted like
consistency, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine someone that just died, what their heartbeat monitor looks like.
Quite flat.
Yeah. And so what we used to work on is, well, how can we create that mediocrity? It was the relentless search of mediocrity, effectively, which sounds really horrible, but
it doesn't sound like something you are striving for, but
no, exactly. But bear in mind that level of mediocrity could have like a low raise up, but they didn't want it going like that. So what we used to do is try and put a pack together, I guess you would call it, of a daily feed of data that we thought was going to achieve this mediocrity. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? Maybe we need a better word, which is consistent high level of performance.
And is part of that, I don't know if fear is the right word, but if you were to show that you could perform better quickly, then that's the new standard, and that you can never go back. So you kind of have to hedge your really good and throw some medium and throw some not so good in there. Is that the thought process?
I think it was more a problem with the sales team, which is they were poorly trained, fly-by-night characters that have like 50% churn every month, where people would leave and whatever. And so there was this insistent they didn't want to give low performers good data, higher performers they could give lower data to and get higher conversion rates. So I'm just talking. So we did other sorts of lead buying where it was more of a just get the best leads you possibly can, bang them in. But I'm just thinking of like some of the biggest buyers of leads, as in the sales teams. They didn't. Basically, they wanted zero surprises and zero unpredictability, and just this like monotonous. Like imagine a drone of a low-flying bomber.
Well, I've worked for the smallest of small companies, the biggest of big companies, and what I like to say, the Goldilocks right in the middle. And I think it all comes down to the ability to forecast, right? Like when you sit down with that finance team, you need to be able to say, this is what we're going to do. And while missing that forecast is bad, like really bad, it's still not great to exceed that forecast by just a marginal amount. You want to be able to show that you can forecast and you can project, because I mean, it's important to show that you have a good handle on your business. So from my perspective, that's a big reason as to why that consistency factor is so important for the client.
That's 100% it. And a good analogy right now is look at all the SaaS businesses that are laying people off, that grew hugely in COVID and then expected that to be the new normal. But the forecast was, hold on, it's not going to carry on like this.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to let people go. So that you're exactly right. It's to do with forecasting. So a lot of the sales teams are on a knife edge of profitability and not, especially when it's leads going into sales centers. So they would rather a sort of lower performance, but that was entirely predictable, than wild swings either way. And you're I could have just killed 5 minutes of me talking by just going forecasting.
Yeah, it's
I'll cut you.
Yeah, edit it all out.
Well, no, I think that we're very much on the same page. And look, it's not often that people get it, right? Like, so there is a lot of, I don't know if sales is the word, but there's a lot of convincing when it comes to this type of marketing, right? And typically in marketing or in advertising, you're convincing the consumer of something. But in this particular part of marketing, you're convincing each other. Like, yes, these are good leads. No, they're not. Okay. And then there's more, I guess, conversation happening between the buyers and the sellers and the internal stakeholders than there is between the brand and the consumer in a way. And it's just a really interesting, I think it's kind of flipping marketing on its head a little bit, but performance marketing, that is. But it's just a really interesting situation for sure.
I think as well, when you're buying leads from lead aggregators, and in a sense, you're sort of, you are outsourcing your marketing, but it's so it's the performance marketing side, not the brand marketing or the other types of marketing. And so sometimes if you were working in B2B, that comes under like revenue operations. It becomes it's a sales marketing effort, not a marketing effort, if you know what I mean. They separate it more than happens in B2C.
Yeah, it's interesting where the performance marketing, what is performance marketing? Is it a segment of marketing, which traditionally, like we said, is looked at as brand, right? It's like, if you were to have somebody picture a marketer 15 years ago, they'd picture like a guy with his feet kicked up on the desk, throwing darts in his office, coming up with the next idea, right? And the truth is that with the way that data has gone, it's become so scientific in a way. And while it's still a balance of art and science, it absolutely has really come towards the science direction. And it's a huge opportunity for us to lean into data and go back into that trust and be able to share data. But without that, it does turn a little bit back, more back into the art, and the ability to test and get answers quickly is all dependent on that data. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that's quite a nice segue into bringing this back to the podcast title. I put this idea of sort of lead buyers acting more professionally. And it's something we've talked about with many people on the podcast, this kind of idea that maybe there is room for them to sort of become more professional and take that however you want. But what's your take on that? Do you think there's room for that? Do you think that's something that needs, or is it different in America? Maybe you've seen that change there already.
I want to make sure that your definition of buyer is the same as mine. Would you mean the client being the buyer, or would you mean the who is the buyer and the seller in your vernacular now?
Probably brand side we'd be talking right now.
So from my perspective, just in the past 5 years, there has been a ton of professionalization on the client side as far as operations, and it's actually become a role in a way. Now you have, if you look at the traditional agency structure, whether it's in-house, hybrid, 100% outsourced, there have always been some key roles. You've always had your creative person, your analytics person has come on in the past, several years. So you basically got your data person, your idea person, your project manager, and your paid person, right? Your agent, or your hands-on keyboard placing bids person. But there's this new person that has a seat at the table, and that is very much the the aggregator partner brand lead person who's working with these external agencies or these external partners. And that has become, I think, a very vital part of the success of any marketing organization, because what it does is it allows you to hedge your marketing mix, right? I've always looked at it, and it's even knowing that you're sitting in England right now and we're having this conversation, the truth is that things happen throughout the world, things happen throughout the country that are sometimes regionalized. And I always think to myself, in an extreme example, if 100% of your business, if I owned a business in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had a little marketing agency here in Cleveland, Ohio, and every single lead that we generated was from a person sitting at a desk in Cleveland, Ohio. And there was some type of event, whether it's Ohio doesn't get a lot of crazy events, so I can't say a hurricane or a tornado, but if there was some type of catastrophic event in that geography, your business is in a very bad position. Now, if you're able to hedge it to where you have partners in England, you have partners in Switzerland, you have partners in Sweden, you have partners in California, in Florida, all throughout the world, your business is no longer 100% at risk, right? You hedge it. So I've always found significant. I think that's one part of professionalization, is not only making sure that person has a seat at the table, but additionally making sure that it's recognized how important that role is. And from my perspective, yes, there has been tremendous movement and kind of legitimization of what exactly that role is and how important that role is for having a seat at the table.
I think you're right as well with that hedging your bets. It's something we speak to lead buyers about. So whether that's either agency or the client side, is if you are going to buy leads externally, you spread your bets, like do it as many places you can, because you can whittle down from there and keep whittling down and, looking into it. But exactly that, you don't want to leave yourself beholden. And you see so many people, I've seen businesses fail because of it, because they just don't spread their bets. And if you're relying on leads to grow as a strategy to grow your business, which you can in a lot of B2C industries because of the nature of, like gutter, they're not, the whole point is it's a commodity, which isn't like a desire. It's not like you're buying a car or something like that. It's like a necessity.
Right, need-based, 100% need-based, of course. Yeah, it's and it's also a category that doesn't have a ton of awareness either, right? So it's one of those things that I always use the example of, you're not selling shoes. Now with shoes, you don't explain to somebody what a shoe is. You don't say, this is a shoe. You put it on your foot, you put laces and tie it up. Like, people know that. You get right into the brand in terms of why your shoe is better than somebody else's. Now you get into some other categories that you need to explain the category. So in the same 30-second commercial or 15-second ad, or if it's OTT or a little banner ad or a landing page, you not only have to explain why your brand is the brand of choice, why you're the one to go with, why people should trust you, but you also have to create the need. This is why you even need to wear it, or the shoe, or, so it's such a different thing, I think, depending on the industry, in terms of how much education that specific product or gadget or whatever it may be needs.
I love the idea of gutters, because it's one of those things that everyone needs. They probably never really think about, but when you think about it, you're like, I need one of those.
I didn't wake up and think about my gutters this morning. I don't know that anybody listening to this did, but the truth is yeah, you absolutely have to, it's one of those things that's important for your house. It's just not something that's necessarily top of mind. So, that's also, and that's not specific to that product or that industry at all. I mean, I could probably think of 100 different products out there that you don't necessarily think about, every day when you wake up, or even every week, but people end up purchasing them because they are products that you need, not necessarily immediately, but it's something that would improve your life.
Yeah. So I just want to touch on this marketing operations thing, because what I find interesting is that in B2B, because it's really strange, because we're a B2B company, but all our clients are B2C, right? So we touch both sides. It's like, we're constantly doing like our own demand gen for Dateable, and then our background and our business is all about the B2C side. So marketing operations is like a buzzword in B2B now. It's you have like Daryl Alfonso, who was at Amazon. I think he's at Indeed now. Evangelizing it and sort of pushing the way, and a bunch of other people, and the people recognizing it. in B2C, it's almost like the marketing operations is a word, but it's not associated like as a role in itself like it is in B2B. It tends to just be like, oh, he's a front end developer, that guy will get it. Or, he knows his way
Right.
around Zapier. That dude will be able to pick it up.
Right. Yeah.
Um, that's something we find anyway. It's like it's an underappreciated role, I think.
Yeah. But it's so vital. It is so vital. And if I had to go on a bet, I hope I listen to this podcast in 5 years and say, yes, I hope that marketing operations is one of the most vital roles. It's another seat at that table that we talked about, right? Because the truth is sometimes it could be kind of disguised a little bit as project management. And I think that there is some truth to that. But I think what it comes down to is being very much a strategist and forward thinking in terms of how to grow marketing and ask the right questions. So I always think about there's three things that make a unicorn employee, and I think a lot of times the marketing operations role is really the culmination of these three things, and I call it the three I's. The first I is the ability to come up with an idea. Can you conceptualize an idea, and can you think of it? It's to do it without being disruptive, though, and it's just kind of the entrepreneur, the person who asks the questions, right? The second I is influence. It's the ability to, whether you're in the boardroom or you're in the break room, it's the ability to get people excited about an idea and get people on board. And the third I is implementation. Can you take that idea that has buy-in and can you put a keyboard and mouse in front of that person and they say, okay, great, see you in 2 hours, I'm going to have it done. That is marketing operations, because the truth is you have to be able to tie together and discover a business need through an idea. You need to be able to get people excited about that idea. And finally, you have to have the technology skills to be able to do it, and not necessarily do it completely yourself, but there's always a way to do something that maybe isn't, I always talk about, like, are we doing this in Play-Doh or are we going to carve it out of marble? We don't even know if it's going to work. Are we sure we want to carve it out of marble, right? So this is the Play-Doh developer. It's the person who might be able to hack it together in Excel and get a working, but not necessarily.
Or just putting stuff together like, Airtable
Yeah,
and stuff here and just like create it in some
absolutely,
third party.
100%. And then as soon as you're sure you have something, maybe you do that for 2 weeks and you're like, okay, this has made a tremendous impact. Let's get the developer involved and let's do it in Python. Let's get the actual creative person involved. And, we did the last version in Canva. Let's make this look legit. But I think too often it goes, and they're so structured where it's like, okay, it's going to go, we're going to take it to our developer, and then it's going to go to the creative person, and then it's going to go here. And guess what? That test was up for 2 hours. It failed. So we just wasted like 30 hours of time when we could have had a Play-Doh solution put together, figured out that this wasn't going to work, and then not invested those hours that way. So that to me is marketing operations, but it is a unicorn type person because they have to have the ability to conceptualize, sell, and actually do. And if you look at most people in the workplace, they can do one, two, not many can do all three, right? So I've always personally been very focused on rounding out my skill set. If I look back at my career path, it has been in marketing operations, right? If you handed me a colored pencil, I could draw you an ad. Don't get me wrong. I can come up with a witty tagline and come up with an advertising line. And I can also, code a little bit of SQL, right? But I think the ability to, if you think about it like on a sports spectrum, you always kind of want to round out the weakest part of your game. That's always been my personal approach. And to me, that's what marketing operations is.
100%. Well, I love. When did you come up with this three eyes thing?
It's something that I think I've always thought about, but I didn't necessarily know how to put it into words. And as I started to write down idea, implementation, and I'm like, oh, this is actually quite an easy way to explain it. So I've been very blessed in my career. I've had some great mentors, and throughout that time, I've always said to myself, when it's my opportunity to give back, I want to recognize some people that have these intangibles that may not have all three, maybe have two and signs of the third, or a little bit of each, but find the person that has just the littlest bit of each one of those things and see if they're interested in growing and learning and getting better and kind of paying it forward in a way and helping that next layer grow. I've always been very, very, very heavy on finding somebody to take my job, because, and it's so counterintuitive, but that is your fastest way to growth, is bringing up somebody next to you versus pushing people down in order for you to grow. So that's my way of identifying talent, is through the 3 I's.
Brilliant. The Play-Doh marble thing as well, it is just like classic MVP, isn't it? And everyone sort of says they do MVP, and then you're like, we've spent far too long on that thing that's going to be MVP.
Yeah, there'll be a meeting with 38 people on it. It'll be an hour long, and you sit back and you're like, wait a minute, like this, are we sure? Right. And especially with digital marketing, I mean, we know that, I'm sure you've launched tests that have been up for an hour before, and based on your traffic and your spend, you start to go, ooh, do we pull it? No, let's give it more time. And then all of a sudden, what you thought was the Mona Lisa ended up being a finger painting, right? And it's like, pull it down. So I think when you're building a campaign, you don't necessarily know you're building the Mona Lisa when you're building it. It's something that the stars align and things come together. So I think that you have to take a very practical approach when you're creating these campaigns, and know that the shelf life may only be 2 hours. So let's make sure that we're taking the right amount of effort into a campaign. And then when we see it work, we scale it up.
100%. And do you have any sort of tactics you would give any lead buyers listening? So just rough things that you've learned that we haven't covered, or we might have covered already.
I think that my main thing when vetting a partner is always about skin in the game, right? And this industry, the audience that we're talking to right now, is all about that, right? And I think that that's the first leg up. But I would always make sure that you communicate that you're willing to have skin in the game. My number one kind of message that I send back when somebody's looking to work with us is, would you be willing to work with us on a performance basis? If they say no, what does that tell me about their belief in their performance, right? Like, you want me to put our money on the line, but you won't put your own, is kind of a scary thing to think about. So when it comes down to it, I think this audience is already doing that. It's, hey, we want to put skin in the game with you. We want to be a true partner. We want to share data. We want to help you grow. We want to grow with you. The next thing that I would say is the partners that we've worked with sometimes start out very small, and I guess what I'm really trying to say here is, not every launch requires a meeting, right? I think we've become so meeting heavy, and even via email say like, hey, yeah, send over some information, and they want to get on a call. And it's like, what are we going to talk about on the call that you couldn't email me? So I think that's another thing, is don't be afraid to email, especially when you're emailing an executive. They don't have a half hour or 45 minutes to dedicate to every single call, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to take the opportunity serious. So put together the spreadsheet, send it over, follow up. That is going to likely get you a response faster than just waiting for that 30-minute call to eventually happen. So I would just say, don't be afraid to say, hey, look, here's a spreadsheet we put together. We think we can get you this many leads based on the other partners we work with. We think here would be your contact rate. Here's a base funnel, and here's the all in. Are you interested? If I saw all that laid out, I have a much more likely, there's a higher likelihood for me of saying, yes, let's do this, forwarding that email over to the person on our team that handles it, then just deleting it because it's another request for an hour or 30 minutes to sit down that I don't really even know the outcome of it yet. So I would say that if I was an SDR and I was on that side of the table, that's what I'd be looking to do.
Yeah, I like you, I get millions of messages on LinkedIn. I get so many cold emails, just that you're exactly right. If someone sent me a cold email laying things out in a really sort of logical way where I could just glance it and go, shit, this guy knows what he's talking about, or whatever else, or woman.
Yeah.
But you never get it. It's always like, I'm in London next week. Can we meet? I want to talk to you about leads you could buy.
Can I buy you coffee?
Yeah. And it's like, I don't even know you. No, delete.
Right.
I don't even read it. I'm so conditioned to them now. I actually don't even read them anymore. But
right. What I love to say is, let's schedule that coffee meeting for a month after we launch and talk about how successful the program was. Right.
Yeah.
So that's that's it's just one thing that I always thought could be done a bit differently, but look, I don't know it all either. I was never on that side of the table. So, hey, there may be a great reason that's not done and that I'm just not privy to, but that's my 2 cents.
What we find quite a lot is buyers will tend to, it's something you touched on earlier with the trust thing. They will tend to work with anyone because they're so desperate to get more and more leads. They're not necessarily equating it with back to sales and doing all the feedback loops and other stuff that we mentioned. And what happens is they get stung. So one of our clients just forwarded 10 grand. So what's that in dollars? Say $15,000 to someone who said, I can generate you leads, but I'll need the money up front. And guess what? He disappeared. And it's just like,
yeah,
why are you sending someone $15,000?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not like going to make them go bust or anything, but at the same time, it's like what you just said is this thing of skin in the game. If they can't generate the leads with their own money, they probably shouldn't be generating leads at all.
Yeah, that's I mean, look, everybody deserves a shot, right? But I also I do think that less is more. We don't want to work with 300 partners that can each give us 50 leads, right? We want to work with, and I hesitate to even call them partners, because at that point it's just like it's going to lack that relationship that I think is so important. So look for the big ones and go into it with a really, really, really thought out, do your research. I can't tell you how many times I answer my phone and I'll say hello. And I know it's a spam call, but hello, because I like to be polite. And look, if I was on the sales side, I think that that's a great way to at least give them a no, right? Don't just string them along. So I'll answer. And then like 15 seconds later, you'll hear somebody scrambling to answer their phone and they'll go, Vince, like totally surprised I answered. And I'm thinking like, thank you for such a personal phone call, like, and if I know that there's a lot of people that say this, but if you were to focus really on the 10 companies you are just dying to work with because they're gigantic, your chances of getting one of those 10, I imagine, is going to be a larger opportunity than emailing 100 different people and maybe getting 10 that don't even amount to the size of one. And then you're going to keep maybe 2 of them. So for me, it would just be really just do your homework and do your research about that company and have something to talk about. And I think that you're going to really up your chances of working with that company.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's a really nice note to end it on, Vince. A good take-home point for people listening and good advice. And yeah, just say thank you for being a fantastic guest today. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and it's always nice to speak to people who share ideas and have similar views on things. It's been a pleasure. It's been great. There's not it's not a real deep audience, or as far as other people that we can reach out to and really, really know the space. So thank you for having me on. It's been a great conversation, Simon, Dan. Let's stay in touch, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. It's been great. Thank you.
Cheers, Vince.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.